Well, spring is finally here, or at least it's trying to be here, which is super exciting. We've got a lot of things planned for this year, and it kind of feels refreshing to be behind winter and looking forward to the building season. Right now though, the frost is coming out of the ground, and when that happens, our roads get destroyed. For those of you that don't live in a climate that has this problem, you might not know about it, but basically as we drive on this driveway during the winter, the frost will actually go deeper here than it will right here where we don't drive. So this over here will thaw out pretty quickly, and it'll start to be pretty solid ground. You can drive on it, no problem. But over here, where we actually run our tires, something about the weight of the vehicles pushes that frost even deeper. And as it tries to come out of the ground, as it melts, this top layer gets really spongy. And as we drive on it, we just basically tear it to pieces. It's a very real problem in our area where load limits get put on the roads. We do that on the paved roads especially, but dirt roads too, because the weight and the speed of the vehicles will greatly determine the amount of damage that's done to the roads in this fairly short period of time where the roads thaw out. Once they're thawed out, there's really no problem hauling heavy loads or driving fast. So right now on all of our county roads, there are road limits, and on the highway too actually, where the trucks are required to go 30 miles an hour, but they can still haul their loads. So the roads aren't shut down, but there are restrictions. It may be a little hard to see on camera here, but there's some pretty good ruts going here. This is the area that in the winter has the most shade. Because of the trees that are behind us, this area gets very little sun in the winter, and so this has the deepest frost, and therefore it's also the last to get the frost to leave. So as we get toward the top of the driveway, it's already starting to look a lot better. The ruts are getting more shallow and everything's starting to kind of firm up. But down here, it's still pretty spongy. Another thing that destroys driveways is plowing during the winter. As much as we'd like to think, we don't try to dig up the gravel underneath. This winter we had 2 of the least desirable plowing days, which is where it snows a bunch, gets really cold, and then it warms up, and then it snows again. And you're kind of left with this sticky situation about whether to plow or to just let it melt. If you let it melt, you risk it refreezing and turning into ice. If it turns into ice, you don't have an ice skating rink for a driveway. If you plow, you risk tearing up the driveway because it's very difficult when the ground is not frozen to plow it smoothly. You'd basically just end up digging a portion of your driveway up. When we first moved to our property, we put down 3 loads of rock, about 30 yards of rock up our driveway to give us a nice, stable driving surface. And over time, that rock will kind of start to wiggle its way down into the dirt. As we go through freeze-thaw cycles, that rock disappears, as they say. Up near the house, as we got ready for winter 2 winters ago, we actually threw some rock up there to keep the mud in the house down and also to help with drainage kind of in front of the house. The reason we haven't done this to the whole property yet is because we still have a lot of trenching to do, and there's no reason to make the driveway beautiful if we're just going to tear it all right back up. The other end of this driveway kind of being spongy is that we have a narrow window of time where we can kind of grade on it, and it's not super compacted. As it dries out and summer starts, this is going to turn to concrete, and it's going to be very difficult to manipulate, where right now it's very soft. And so we should be able to get it nice and smooth and do just a little bit of work and make it a nice driveway that will be durable and fairly low dust during the summer. When we first moved here and we put the rock down on the driveway, we didn't know where to get a geotech fabric or a road fabric, so we went ahead and just put rock down. It works, but over time your driveway eats the rock. The rock just disappears. It goes into the ground, kind of gets mixed up, and you have to keep adding rock. There's always this debate about what's cheaper, rock or fabric, because I can tell you the fabric is pretty expensive, and so is rock. I guess on a case-by-case basis you have to answer which one's cheaper. I would say in the long run, the fabric is definitely cheaper than the rock. If you factor in the cost and the labor of having to put rock down every season, that's going to be an even bigger return on your investment with the fabric. So we purchased this fabric from a local construction supply once we figured out where to get it. And like I said, it's not cheap, but it's a very durable product that should last as long as you keep a good amount of topping rock on it. This product comes in a couple of different configurations. This one happens to be woven. You can see the weave there. They also make a non-woven version, and I'm not really sure why you would use one over another in a particular application. I know that you can use a similar fabric to this as a drainage fabric, like around the foundation of a house, and that may be something where you would use a non-woven. So if you're looking for this type of fabric, wherever you source it from, be sure to inquire and ask a little bit of questions to make sure you're getting the right stuff. I bought this as a 432 foot roll, 12.5 feet wide. They do make a 15 wide product, and I can tell you that you're gonna pay just under $1 a linear foot for this product. So you can see that this is a pretty good investment for a roll of this fabric. When we buy rock and we have it trucked in, let me back up. We can't even get rock right now because of the load limits. That's another factor to this whole spring road repair problem, is if you don't plan ahead and have rock delivered before the road limits go on, you're actually not going to be able to fix your driveway until after the load limits are removed, at which point it's just going to be more difficult to do. So anyway, when we have rock delivered, we pay $200 or so for a load of 3/4 minus rock, topping rock. 120 of that or so is the rock. It's about $10 a yard, and then between $80 and $100 for the trucking. It only takes a couple loads of rock to add up to the cost of this fabric. So usually the process goes something like this. We want to grade what's already here just a little bit to remove some of the high spots, because what'll happen is we'll have kind of low spots where the rock is going to want to hide, and we only have about 10 or 11 yards of rock on hand, which is enough to do this short stretch of driveway. But if it's all lumpy and bumpy, we're going to end up catching the fabric on the blade of the excavator and moving it around, and trust me, it'll be super annoying. So if we do a little bit of grading work to start with, that makes a nice smoothish surface. We can lay the fabric down, and then we can start adding the topping rock over the top of the fabric, and then we need to grade the rock on top, and then we just need to drive on it and hope it rains a bunch, and then drive on it a bunch. Well, that's looking quite a bit better. If I had my druthers, I'd rather put down some 2-inch minus rock, maybe underneath this, or something to kind of smooth it out a little bit. This river rock, this round glacial till or whatever, is annoying to work with. But we turned up a little bit of it, and that's because that 3/4 minus gravel that we've been putting down there is just disappearing. It's kind of getting eaten up by the ground. So what we're left with is a bit of a mess. When we started doing this, I think we had probably 5 inches of gravel here, and we're down to turning up the rock that was underneath of it. Hopefully this fabric will kind of nix that problem, and in the future when we come out and smooth the driveway out, which I'm assuming we'll still have to do after the fabric is down, in future winters or future springs, hopefully we don't turn up all these stinking rocks. I suppose there's probably someone watching this video, perhaps, who doesn't understand all this rock jargon. So maybe I'll just take just a second and explain when I say 3/4 minus what I mean. So this is actually a rock that is crushed at the quarry, and they basically don't wash the rock. They leave all this fine particulate in there, and the net effect is that it compacts extremely well. All that fine material basically turns to concrete. If you get it wet and drive over it a whole bunch and compact it, it gets super hard. If they wash the rock, and that would be 3/4 washed, then it doesn't pack nearly as well or at all. This is something you might want in a landscaping project or like a walkway, because it doesn't track dirt. It's very clean rock, and so it's more like gravel is probably a good way to put it. So we're not putting 3/4 washed rock down here because it would just all run down the driveway and disappear, which we don't want. So we're using a minus product, which includes everything from the crusher. Most quarries have a variety of rock products that you can purchase. A very common road bed would be made from something like 2-inch rock minus. It's fairly big and chunky, and it tends to kind of add bulk and build something up fairly quickly, but it's not smooth. And that's why we use the 3/4-inch rock as a topping rock, and because it creates a nice smooth surface once it's compacted. Even if you drive over 2-inch minus, once it compacts, which it will, it's still really rough to drive on. If you've never been around a farm that's in an area where there's a lot of rocks, every spring they actually turn up rocks like this in a lot of these fields. The frost has the ability to literally move these rocks to the surface, and that could also be a factor why these rocks are popping up and they're near the surface. It's incredible the power of the frost to move these things up and down. Well, the easy part is done. So we got all the rock in place, looking pretty good. I tried to distribute it evenly, but pretty hard to do when you're dumping with the bucket like that. A trick, if you're having rock delivered, is to do what's called tailgating the rock. They actually have a stop that they can put like a chain on the tailgate of the dump truck, and they can actually lay this rock for you. If the driver's pretty good, he can lay it pretty even, which will really minimize the amount of effort that you have to put forward to spread the rock. I did okay on this. It's still going to be a little bit of work to get it evened out and graded properly, but I'll also tell you that a bad dump truck driver will make your life really difficult. It was totally an accident, but one time we had rock delivered. The truck thought he had put the tailgate stops on. He drove up the driveway and dumped 11 yards of rock at the road. 2 problems there. 3 problems. 1, he can't get out because he just blocked the driveway. 2, I have to drag the rock, all of it, across the driveway so he can get out. And 3, I have to drag it uphill. All of that made it really difficult. So if you're going to use a tailgate on a dump truck, make sure it's locked in and kind of keep an eye on the driver. To help us get this smoothed out, we're going to use the blade on the excavator. We specifically chose this excavator because it has a 6-way blade. Let me kind of show you how that works. So this blade on the front actually moves 6 different directions. Up and down, left and right, and it actually tilts also to the left and the right. This allows us to get a super good grading. We can adjust the depth, we can grade to one direction or the other, like if we were going to backfill, and then we can also tilt the blade so that we can smooth something out and make it level, or we can actually add a bevel to it. A lot of these mini excavators have a blade on them now, a backfilling blade. A lot of times they call it a grading blade, but it's usually only a 2-way blade, up or down, and the blade is fixed. There's not a lot else you can do. This particular model has this 6-way blade, which makes it super practical. One more facet to this blade is what is called float. Sometimes you want to dictate the height of the blade and you want it to stay right there, like if you're trying to dig with it or something like that. But when you're trying to grade something, a float feature helps you to make a nice smooth surface without digging and gouging the surface. So we can put this blade into float and it will kind of hover on the surface versus digging into what we're grading. I can tell you from experience, if you think moving 11 yards of rock with a machine is easy, you're wrong. 11 yards of rock is a lot of work to move, so you'd rather spread it if you can, sometimes at the delivery, or like we did with the backhoe, a yard at a time. This machine is good for the finishing touches, but it's not great for moving a lot of rock. So I'm hoping that when we spread all this rock out and hopefully we get to the edge of the fabric, we have about 2 to 3 inches of topping rock on top of the fabric. The fact that this is topping rock means you don't really want to apply it in a lot of depth, like 6 or 8 inches of topping rock might not make much sense. If you have that much fill, you're probably going to want to use a bulkier rock like 2-inch or 3-inch minus to build up your driveway, like say if it's really bumpy or lumpy. And then once you get your fabric down, you just need a little bit of topping to create kind of that concrete surface we talked about earlier. Like that story that I mentioned earlier, if you're going to be spreading this rock, you want to spread it downhill. You do not want to try to pull this rock uphill. It doesn't look heavy because we've been using machines, but trust me, trying to drag this rock uphill with a tracked machine is not a lot of fun. right, gravel is spread. That didn't go exactly as planned. For whatever reason, I haven't figured out really a great way to spread this 3/4 minus. You would think that angling the blade and it would act like an angle blade, right? It doesn't. This 3/4 minus will just push straight forward. It's incredible. So there's something there that I haven't quite figured out. But anyway, we got all the rocks spread, and so now we basically just need to get the grade and the smoothness that we're after. So even though we spread it, it's not perfectly equal in thickness. So it's going to take a little bit of time kind of working my way up and down the driveway, getting this kind of spread up and down instead of left and right. And hopefully when we're all done, it's nice and smooth and the thickness is fairly even. I pulled a little bit of this stuff to the top of the driveway because I want to have a fairly smooth transition from the fabric to the existing driveway at the top. But hopefully now we can actually drag this down and hopefully we'll get a better overall finish, not having the tracks having to pull the machine up the hill. Probably the number one mistake I think that a lot of people make when they're running equipment is they get impatient. This is a very powerful machine, meaning over time you could outproduce 10 people with a shovel or 100 people with a shovel. But the deceptive thing is the machine may not move fast visibly. It may not look like it's moving quick, but the work that it's doing is exponentially faster than doing it by hand. So especially when it comes to digging or grading, I think for me it's an act of patience to get the finish that you're looking for. Everyone wants to just go ballistic speed, and when you're getting to the finer stages of these things, slowing down will actually make the machine work better and you'll get done quicker. I've got the lights turned on, but I think we can actually get this done this evening. So let's give it a try. Well, looks like we got the driveway done in the nick of time. There is a nasty rain cloud over there that is gonna do a lot of good for this driveway. I definitely struggled a lot today getting the gravel where I wanted. That's a process that I think just takes time. I mentioned earlier patience. Well, patience is easy to say. It's another thing to really take the time to let the machines do their work. I know I say this a lot, but it is gonna save you time in the end because spreading this by hand is a lot of work. Anyway, finally found a magic combination between the backhoe, using the float on the bucket, and the excavator. For some reason, the float on this excavator doesn't do what you'd think it would do. You would think that it would just make a beautiful finish, but it doesn't. It digs and it makes a mess, and it's really frustrating. So I said a few expletives, which is part of the game, I guess. But in the end, I think I'm really happy with how the driveway turned out. We've got about 3 inches of rock or so. It's a little less than I probably would have liked, but that's just how it worked out. I think as the rain comes and we drive on it, we may end up adding another load of rock to this eventually, but I think we're in a really good spot going forward.